The barn smelled of damp wood, old hay, and something cruel in the air. Light filtered weakly through the high windows, casting long shadows that clung to the dirt floor like ghosts. Sitting hunched on a worn-out bench, Harold Whitmore buried his face in his hands. His shoulders trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of humiliation. Behind him, 4 men laughed hard, like boys who'd never learned the meaning of respect. Chuck, in a light blue button-up, held out a metal clicker like it was a remote control for Harold's dignity. Ray, silver-haired and red-shirt, slapped his knee between bursts of laughter. Tommy, the cowboy hat barely hiding his grin, leaned forward, pointing with cruel amusement. Mark, younger but just as smug, looked like he'd waited years for this moment. None of them were strangers to Harold. They were neighbors, rivals, and now, judges. "So, this is the big day, huh, Harold?" Chuck sneered. "You gonna show us that legendary champion of yours? Hope he doesn't trip on his way in." Harold said nothing. His pride was a worn-down thing, fragile but still burning somewhere deep inside. He stood slowly, bones creaking like the barn itself, and walked toward the last stall. The only sound was a soft whistle, a low, broken tune that only one creature in the world recognized. As he reached the gate, the air in the barn changed. And then he stepped out. The dark bay stallion emerged from the shadows like a king returning from exile. Muscles rippled beneath his coat, rich as molasses, with a sleek black mane that framed his intelligent, unblinking eyes. The red saddle pad beneath the perfectly fitted western saddle blazed like a flag of defiance. This wasn't a farm horse. This was a statement. A memory resurrected. A legend, alive and breathing. The laughter died instantly. Chuck's hand dropped. Tommy's grin vanished. Ray shifted in his seat, visibly uncomfortable. Even Mark leaned forward, as if his eyes couldn't believe what they were seeing. The barn fell into complete silence, not the kind born of awe, but the kind that clings to fear. And maybe, regret. No one said a word, but they all thought the same thing. They had underestimated the wrong man. And as Harold placed a steady hand on the horse's neck, his eyes met theirs, no longer filled with shame, but with fire. And the auction hadn't even started yet. We're about to reach 100,000 hearts who believe in the power of animals and second chances. If you're part of this family, hit that subscribe button and help us reach this unforgettable milestone. Let's do this together. The air was thick with something no one could quite name. Part tension, part disbelief. The old barn, moments ago echoing with laughter, now held only shallow breaths and darting eyes. The stallion stood like a statue, ears twitching as if listening for permission to move. But he didn't need a command. His presence was enough. He was the kind of animal that didn't beg to be noticed, he demanded it. Harold adjusted the reins slowly, his fingers steady now, no longer hiding. The years had taken his land, his reputation, even his family name. But in that moment, every eye was on him, and no one dared to speak. He led the stallion a few steps forward, and the horse responded with a smooth, powerful gait, like silk drawn across stone. Dust rose with each step, swirling in quiet tribute. Ray cleared his throat, a dry sound that echoed awkwardly. That's not the colt you were training back in 19, is it?" His voice was tight, like he already knew the answer and feared it. Harold didn't reply. He didn't need to. The horse was too young to be that colt. Too polished. Too perfect. Whatever Harold had done, whatever he'd poured into this animal, it was something they couldn't mock. Not anymore. Tommy stepped closer, hat in hand now, no longer laughing. His boots scraped the dirt with a hesitant shuffle. "Where'd you get him, Harold? That bloodline, he's got fire in his legs." There was no sarcasm in his voice anymore. Only a quiet urgency. The kind of tone a man uses when he realizes he's not the strongest one in the room. Harold finally looked at them, not with triumph, but with a tired kind of defiance. "Didn't get him," he said, voice like gravel. "I raised him. Trained him every day for 5 years. While you all were counting me out, I was building him up." His words cut deeper than any insult could. They weren't angry. They were honest. And honesty hurts more when it's impossible to deny. Chuck looked down at the floor. He wasn't laughing now. None of them were. And as the door to the auction ring creaked open in the distance, a cold wind swept through the barn like a warning. The world outside was about to see what they had just witnessed. And suddenly, all 4 men realized something terrifying. They weren't laughing at Harold anymore. They were afraid of what he was about to do. The auction barn was louder than Harold remembered. Rows of seats creaked under the weight of local ranchers, breeders, and investors from neighboring counties. The smell of popcorn and dust mixed with the faint odor of livestock, creating a strange sort of electricity in the air. The announcer's voice echoed through the old speakers as numbers were shouted, hands raised, deals made. But all that faded when the back gate creaked open, and Harold stepped into the ring. Whispers rippled across the crowd like wind through wheat. Some leaned forward, squinting. Others exchanged looks of disbelief. At first glance, Harold was just another old-timer bringing in another horse. But then they saw the stallion. The sleek coat, dark as coffee, gleaming under the lights. The red saddle pad like a flag planted in enemy territory. And the way the horse moved, not trotting, but gliding, head high, eyes alert. A collective murmur filled the arena. From the side rail, Chuck, Ray, Tommy, and Mark had taken front row seats. They watched in stiff silence, the laughter long gone. Their expressions now carried something closer to dread. Because this wasn't just about a horse anymore. It was about a man they'd tried to erase, now walking into the spotlight like he belonged there all along. The auctioneer paused longer than usual, reading the entry card twice. "Lot 47, he finally said, adjusting his mic, "Bay Stallion. 5 years old. Sire, King's Fortune. Dam, Aurora Blaze." That name hit the crowd like a dropped hammer. Aurora Blaze was a legend, a mare with championships that had once put Harold's name in national headlines. But she'd vanished from the scene after an injury. No one knew she'd ever foaled again. Now they did. People began to stand. Phones came out. Bidders who hadn't planned to spend a dime leaned in, whispering into assistants' ears. It was no longer just a transaction. It was history walking before them. A chance to buy the final legacy of a forgotten bloodline. And Harold stood at the center of it all, tired, wrinkled, and absolutely unshakable. The first bid came fast. Then another. Then a war broke out in numbers, voices rising, paddles flying. But through it all, Harold didn't flinch. His hand rested gently on the stallion's shoulder, grounding them both. He wasn't just selling a horse. He was selling the proof that he still mattered. And outside the barn, in the dirt parking lot, a black SUV pulled in quietly, carrying someone Harold hadn't seen in over 20 years. From his place in the ring, Harold could feel the rising heat of the bidding war. Numbers were flying. 12,000, 15, then 20. A few gasps echoed as the auctioneer's voice climbed in pitch, trying to keep up. But Harold wasn't listening to numbers. His eyes drifted beyond the lights, past the raised paddles and flashing cameras, toward the barn's back doors. He had seen the black SUV. And more importantly, he knew who drove it. It had been 23 years since Harold last saw her. The woman who left the farm without a word, taking with her the only child they'd raised together. Marianne. Once the fiercest spirit in his life, smart, defiant, and tired of living in Harold's shadow. She had sworn never to return, not after the accident that ruined Aurora Blaze's career. Harold blamed himself. He always did. But part of him never stopped wondering if she blamed him too. Now, as the SUV's passenger door opened, a tall figure stepped out. A woman in her early 40s, with long dark hair tied back in a tight ponytail, and a sharp gaze that scanned the crowd like she was searching for something, or someone. Her name was Clare, their daughter, grown now. The last time Harold saw her, she was 16, shouting through tears as she climbed into her mother's car. He remembered every word. The memory hit him like a blow to the chest. "You care more about those horses than you ever cared about us." She had slammed the door. He hadn't chased her. He should have. In the present, the bid hit 29,000, and the crowd buzzed with disbelief. The announcer looked stunned. No horse had fetched that kind of number in the county in over a decade. But even with the excitement around him, Harold's eyes stayed locked on the woman now standing in the back row of the crowd, arms folded, lips tight, eyes red. Clare. She wasn't bidding. She was watching. Harold's chest tightened. It wasn't pride. It was fear. Because no matter how much he had proven to the world today, the one thing he'd never proven was that he'd changed. That he regretted what he'd lost. The stallion next to him shifted, sensing his unease, pressing its head gently against Harold's shoulder. A subtle gesture, but powerful. And in that moment, Clare took one slow step forward. Not toward the horse. Toward him. Clare stood just beyond the ring's railing, her eyes fixed not on the horse, but on Harold. The murmurs of the crowd faded around her as if she were underwater. Bidding had slowed, voices growing softer, confused by the woman who now commanded attention without saying a single word. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just looked at him, and for the first time in decades, Harold didn't know what to do. The last time they had been this close, there had been shouting. Slammed doors. Years of resentment pouring out like a storm with no end. Harold had stayed silent back then. Too proud, too broken, or maybe just too afraid to admit he had failed as a father. Now, face to face with the same girl, now a woman, he saw not the anger she once wore like armor, but something far worse, disappointment. "I thought you were dead," Clare finally said, her voice quiet but sharp as a blade. A few heads turned toward her. She didn't care. Not literally. Just gone. "You disappeared from our lives and built this little world with your horses like none of us ever existed." Harold opened his mouth, then closed it again. He felt every eye in the arena shift toward him. Not the judgmental gaze of old rivals, but something more piercing, expectation. As if they, too, wanted to know what kind of man he really was. Slowly, he stepped out of the spotlight and moved toward the rail where Clare stood, the stallion walking faithfully at his side. "I didn't know how to fix it," Harold said, his voice rough, unpracticed. "After you left. After your mom left. I thought maybe if I stayed quiet, stayed out of the way, it'd hurt less. I poured everything into him," he nodded toward the stallion, "because I didn't know how to hold on to anything else." Claire's eyes glistened, but she didn't blink. "You didn't call. Not once." "I know." He looked down. "And every day I didn't, it got harder to believe you'd want to hear from me." There was a pause so heavy it could have crushed the rafters. Clare lowered her arms, hands trembling slightly. Behind them, the auctioneer announced, "Final bid, 32,000, but neither of them reacted. And then, Clare did something Harold didn't expect. She reached out, not to the horse but to him. Her hand rested on his forearm, just for a second. But it was enough. And someone in the crowd snapped a photo. One that would go viral by morning. What would you have done in Clare's place? Would you forgive him after all those silent years, or walk away for good? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We're listening. The photo spread fast, first through the phones of those in attendance, then to local news feeds, and within hours, to national equestrian forums. But Harold didn't know any of that yet. He was still in the ring, motionless, his daughter's hand still warm against his arm. Around them, the auction had ended. The crowd had begun to shift, people returning to their conversations, but something in the air had changed. For the first time in a long time, Harold wasn't invisible. Clare stepped back slowly, as if waking from a long, heavy dream. She didn't say anything, but her eyes said more than her mouth ever could. There was pain there, years of it, but also recognition. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But the door had opened a crack, and that was more than Harold had ever let himself hope for. He nodded softly, acknowledging that the moment, however brief, had meant something. A man in a suit approached from the far side of the ring. He was younger, clean-shaven, clipboard in hand, a representative from one of the elite breeding stables out west. "Mr. Whitmore," he said carefully, "we've just confirmed the winning bid, $32,000. Congratulations." "But," he paused, glancing at the stallion, "our buyer has requested something unusual. He wants to meet you. Personally." Harold frowned. "Meet me?" The man nodded. He said, "A horse like that doesn't just happen. I want to shake the hand of the man who built him." Harold felt the weight of those words settle into his bones. For decades, he'd been the man they ignored, laughed at, pitied. Now someone saw not just the horse, but the work, the sacrifice, the years poured into it. The applause had never come when he was struggling. But now, standing in the ring, next to the daughter he thought he'd lost, Harold realized he wasn't chasing applause anymore. He was chasing peace. As the representative walked away to finalize paperwork, Clare turned to him again. "What are you going to do with the money?" she asked, her voice softer now, but still testing him. "You could leave. Start fresh." Harold looked at the stallion, then back at her. "Money's just paper. I thought I needed it. But today," he glanced toward the emptying bleachers, "I realized I needed something else a lot more." He hesitated. "I was thinking maybe I'd fix up the old house. Paint the porch. Plant something." Clare raised an eyebrow. "You planting something?" He gave a small, tired smile. "Maybe. If someone's willing to help." And for the first time in 23 years, Clare smiled back. The next morning came with the scent of dew on dry earth and the low hum of cicadas in the distance. Harold sat on the front porch of the farmhouse, staring out across the overgrown fields that once fed half the county. The stallion grazed quietly in the paddock, the red saddle pad now resting on the railing beside Harold's chair. The energy of the auction had faded, replaced by something quieter, reflection. Clare hadn't stayed the night. She'd said she needed time to think and booked a motel just outside of town. But she'd taken a photo of the horse before she left. Harold saw her do it, even though she thought he wasn't looking. That meant something. He hadn't pressed her to stay. He couldn't. She owed him nothing. But still, the fact that she was even nearby gave the house a different feeling. Less empty. Less dead. Inside, the house was frozen in time. Dusty frames lined the hallway, photos of Clare as a child, of Marianne smiling beside a prize-winning mare. Harold hadn't touched those frames in years. Now, he found himself wiping one clean with the sleeve of his shirt. The glass shook in his hand, not from weakness, but from the flood of memories rushing in too fast. He wondered if Clare remembered this house. The kitchen door that always stuck. The swing out back. The way the floor creaked in her old bedroom. He spent most of the day in silence, repairing a loose fence post near the stables. His hands still knew the rhythm, even if his body protested with every movement. But it felt good, real, to fix something tangible. The sun was starting to set when he heard a car roll up the gravel drive. A familiar black SUV. He didn't look up right away. He didn't want to scare the moment away. Clare stepped out, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. She didn't say anything at first, just leaned on the fence next to him. For a while, they watched the horse in silence. "You kept everything the same," she said finally. "Some things weren't worth changing," Harold replied. She glanced toward the barn. "You still live in the past?" Harold nodded. "Yeah, but I think I'd like to try living in the present. Starting now." Claire didn't smile this time, but she didn't look away either. She handed him one of the coffees. Their fingers brushed. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was something. And sometimes, that's how healing starts, not with words, but with quiet decisions to stay. They sat on the porch for nearly an hour without saying much. The coffee had long gone cold, but neither Harold nor Clare seemed to care. The sky had turned a soft lavender, and the cicadas had started again. The silence between them wasn't heavy like before. It had changed. It was cautious, yes, but no longer bitter. It was the kind of silence people sit in when they're trying to find their way back to something they once knew. "You ever think about selling it?" Clare finally asked, nodding toward the land. The fields, the barn, the house that time had half forgotten. Harold didn't answer right away. He looked out at the fence line, at the far corner where the old willow tree used to stand. "I did," he said, "many times. But every time I got close, I heard your mother's voice in my head, telling me not to quit just because it hurt." Claire exhaled slowly. "She used to say that to me too." That name, Marianne, still hung in the air between them like a photo half buried in dust. Neither had spoken of her directly, and neither quite dared to now. But the mention of her brought with it the same ache they both carried, just in different places. Claire looked at the porch boards under her boots. "You know she was sick the last few years, right?" Harold's head turned slowly. "No, I didn't." Claire nodded. She didn't want anyone to know. Said it was her punishment, whatever that meant. Her voice caught a little, and she looked away. "She passed 2 summers ago. In Oregon. I handled everything." The words hit Harold with more force than any auctioneer's hammer ever could. He didn't speak. Couldn't. His eyes burned, but no tears came. It was too much and too late all at once. All those years waiting for a call, for a letter, for anything, wasted. He had been angry at her, but deep down, he'd always thought there would be time. And now, there wasn't. Claire glanced at him, and for the first time that day, she saw it, the crack in the armor, the man behind the stubborn silence. "She read about you once," she added. "That little write-up they did in the regional horse magazine when you bred that mare in 2017. She kept the page. Said she was proud. Never said it to me. But I saw it in her drawer." Harold closed his eyes. "She was the one who saw something in me. Long before anyone else did." Claire nodded. "Then maybe it's time you started seeing it too." A week had passed since Gus's final breath, but the house still felt like it belonged to him. His collar remained on the mantel, untouched. His blanket still lay folded on the end of the couch. Maud hadn't moved it. She couldn't. It wasn't about holding on, it was about honoring the stillness he left behind. Every morning she reached for a leash that wasn't there. Every night she paused by the door, waiting for the soft thump of his tail. Grief had a rhythm, and hers was now echoing in the spaces Gus used to fill. She had expected the days after to be quiet, but not like this. Not so hollow. The house creaked louder. The coffee tasted different. Even her boots, when they hit the floor in the morning, seemed to land with a weight she hadn't noticed before. But it was in that silence that Maud began to hear something else. Her own thoughts. Not the chaotic noise of guilt and memory, but the slow, uncertain voice of someone remembering who she was without a mission to run or a uniform to wear. It was Irving who first suggested they go back to the arena. "They're holding a service," he said. Not just for Chuck, but, well, for Gus too. Folks have been asking about you. Maud hesitated. The thought of standing in front of those people again without Gus by her side felt unbearable. But then Irving added, "You don't owe them anything. But maybe you owe something to yourself." And so, on a Sunday morning beneath a cloudless sky, Maud returned. The arena looked the same. Dirt, stands, flags flapping in the wind, but something had changed. People nodded when she passed. Some placed hands over their hearts. Children waved. A little boy, no older than 5, walked up with his mother and handed her a drawing. It was of a big brown dog with a badge on its collar. "That's Gus," the boy said proudly. "He's a hero." She knelt down, her eyes stinging, and smiled. "Yes, he is." For a moment, Maud felt that familiar warmth again, like he was there, right behind her, tail wagging, ready for whatever came next. She stood and turned toward the center of the arena. The same place she'd stood with Gus. Only this time, she was alone. And yet, not entirely. Back home that evening, Maud placed the drawing beside Gus's collar on the mantel. Then, for the first time, she picked up his blanket. Not to hold it, but to fold it away. Spring arrived quietly in Abilene. The bluebonnet stretched along the roadside, and the air smelled of dirt, grass, and beginnings. Maud stood in the backyard of her father's house, sleeves rolled up, her hands deep in the soil of a garden bed that hadn't seen care in years. Gus's favorite sunspot was just a few feet away, now marked with a small plaque she had carved herself. "You served with honor. You stayed with love." She read the words every morning. Not for him, but for her. Irving had changed too, in ways that surprised her. He still didn't say much, but he started showing up. With coffee. With tools. With silence that felt more like presence than absence. Sometimes they worked side by side without speaking for hours. Other times, he'd tell a story about Cody, ones Maud had never heard. Ones that didn't hurt as much as they used to. It was slow. Uneven. But real. One afternoon, a letter arrived from the local VA office. They'd heard about Gus, about Maud's background, and were inviting her to speak at a veteran support group. "We could use someone like you," the letter read. For hours she sat with it in her lap, unsure if she could carry that weight. Then she remembered what Irving had said, "What's left is someone who's still standing." And maybe that was enough. At the meeting, Maud didn't speak first. She listened. To stories of loss, addiction, isolation, and ghosts that followed others home too. Then, finally, she stood up. "My name's Maud," she began, voice steady. "I served overseas. I came back with more than I left with, and not all of it good. But I also came back with a dog. His name was Gus. He didn't just keep me alive, he reminded me I still was." There was silence. Then nods. Then something she hadn't expected. Connection. That night, back home, Maud sat on the porch while the stars appeared one by one, slow and steady. She held Gus's collar in her hands, thumb tracing the edge like a memory she didn't want to wear out. She thought about Cody. About all the things she never got to say. But maybe, just maybe, living was a way to keep saying them. In action. In presence. In healing. As the wind shifted and the night deepened, Maud whispered, "You can rest now, buddy." And for the first time in a long, long time, she allowed herself to rest too. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to never miss powerful, emotional stories like this one. Would you have forgiven or walked away forever? Tell us in the comments below.